recognize Honorable Joseph Isaac, Speaker of the House of Assembly, Honorable Attorney General Levi Peter, Honorable Members of Cabinet, observers Justice Raphael Musaga from the Commonwealth Secretariat, Ms. Meline Glean from the OAS, Mr. Dwight Lay from the OECS, Mr. Sas Kunraj from CARICOM, Ms. Corinne Prevost, Secretary to the Cabinet, Ms. Denise Edwards, Financial Secretary, Permanent Secretary, Senior Public Officers, Dr. Kenneth Daru, Special Envoy in the Office of the Prime Minister with responsibility for electoral modernization, Dr. Kimon Joseph, Head of the UE Open Campus, Dr. Hermancia Eugene, Dean of Academic Affairs of the Dominica State College, and other lecturers, representatives of professional groups and associations, business leaders, all other invited guests, members of the media, those joining us on the airwaves, good evening. I wish to extend greetings to you, and I heartily welcome you to night 3 of the consultations on electoral reform. I am sure that many of you have been following the discussions over the last 2 days. It is being live streamed and it's being carried on DBS Radio, Kyrie FM Radio, and other stations. We have met so far with the legal fraternity. Last night we met with politicians and political parties. This evening we will hear from senior public officers, professionals, and academia. This is a very important process that you are participating in this evening. This is a good example of democracy at work, where a wide cross-section of people across the country are being given the opportunity to be heard and to have their views considered on matters of extreme national significance and importance. The issue of electoral reform or electoral modernization has been dominating the airwaves, political platforms, social gatherings for many years now, even at times becoming heated and contentious. We have the opportunity now to shape what the future of our electoral process should look like. There are important issues to be discussed. These include whether ID card should be mandatory for voting, should it be a voter ID card, a multi-purpose card, or should a government-issued ID suffice? Should persons be fingerprinted, or should facial recognition be the only biometrics employed? Should Dominicans living in the diaspora who were properly registered be removed from the register after 5 years of absence from Dominica? Or should it be 10 years, 15 years, or no restriction? Should absence be defined as not having been in Dominica for 90 or 50 days during a 5-year period? Or should a single visit of a week or 2 stop time running? Are we comfortable with the chairman of the Mental Health Review Board sending to the chief registering officer every quarter the name, address, date of birth, and occupation of any person who has been certified as having a mental health disorder, with no qualification as to whether they are registered voters, whether they are minors, etc.? Should there be mandatory access for all political parties to the state-owned media? Should we use an electronic voting system for elections? Is this necessary for Dominica, or is it unnecessarily costly and burdensome? Has it worked properly elsewhere? Should there be rules introduced for political campaign financing? How should that work? Would it disadvantage less organized parties and independent candidates? Should there be changes to the composition of the Electoral Commission? How should its budget be managed? Are changes being proposed that require constitutional amendment? And is this appropriate for this discussion? Are they practical? So these are just some of the issues that you are asked to ponder on, to discuss in a mature, constructive manner, with a view to drawing closer to some changes that we can agree on and take forward to Parliament. All of you would have received copies of Sir Dennis's report, which is in 2 parts. He presented it to the government in June this year, and it was made available to the public by the government a few days later. I trust that you have read it thoroughly and are prepared to speak to the issues in the report tonight. This process of consultation is being observed by representatives of the Commonwealth Secretariat, the OS, CARICOM, and OECS, and so I welcome in a special way Justice Musaga, Ms. Glynn, Mr. Lay, and Mr. Gunraj, and I thank them for joining us here tonight. And the Honorable Attorney General will first present an overview of the report and the recommendations, and then we will open the floor for your comments. So I invite the Honorable Attorney General to address us now.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Honorable Joseph Isaac, Speaker of the House of Assembly. Madam Chairperson, Ambassador Barron, honorable members of Cabinet, observers, Justice Masaga of the Commonwealth Secretariat, Ms. Merlin Green of the Organization of American States, OAS, Mr. Dwight Lay of the OECS, Mr. Gunraj of CARICOM, Ms. Karen Prebles, Secretary to the Cabinet, Permanent Secretaries, Dr. Kenneth Darrow, Special Envoy in the Office of the Prime Minister with responsibility for electoral modernization, Dr. Kimon Joseph, Head of the UE Open Campus, Dr. Eugene, Dean of Academic Affairs, Dominica State College, and other lecturers, representatives of professional groups and associations, business leaders, all other invited guests, and all other persons present, and members of the media. Good evening, all. I've been asked to give an overview of the report of Sir Dennis Byron, submitted in June of this year. And let me just say before starting that the presentation that I make is really intended, as it is indicated, to be just an overview, and is a brief overview. You would have read, I hope, the report in its entirety, and you would have identified issues that you consider of importance to you, and you will address those as you deem fit. This presentation is not intended to be a commentary on the report of Sir Dennis, nor is it intended to be an exposition of a detailed exposition of the provisions, nor indeed is it intended to be an expression of my opinion or that of the government. I assure you I have an opinion, but this is not the time at which I need to give it. So I will try to stick to what I perceive to be a factual representation of what I consider to be substantive components of the report. So Dennis presented his report in two phases. Phase one, he articulated as focusing on cleansing the voters list, and that, he said, would have or has had emphasis on voter identification and voter registration system. And it also was accompanied by two pieces of legislation, two proposed bills, one the Registration of Electors Act 2023, and the other Registration of Electors Regulations of 2023. So Dennis proposes that those two pieces of legislation be adopted and serve as the legislative guide for the registration process in respect to Dominica's electoral system. Phase two of his report, he identified three overarching areas. One, the electoral process, which he deemed as primarily dealing with access to the media, and secondly, campaign financing. The second area is that of electoral commission, and he identified a number of areas under that. One is its composition. Two is its financial autonomy, which he recommends. Three is staffing, which he also recommends a higher level of autonomy to the commission in that regard. Four, the appointment of committees. Five, the procedure for resignation of members of the commission. And six, provision for protection of members of the commission from suit. And the third and final element that he addresses is new legislation. And under that, he recommends four pieces of legislation that he says ought to be enacted to underpin the second phase of his report, namely the House of Assembly Elections Act of 2023, they already stand me to work at the Prime Minister's desk. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I saw the Prime Minister seeking to wave everybody down, but unfortunately, it was too late, and I think the appropriate action was taken. Welcome, Prime Minister. So if I continue, so the third element I was saying is the 4 pieces of legislation that Sir Dennis proposes to underpin Phase 2 of his report, the House of Assembly Elections Act 2023, House of Assembly Elections Regulations 2023, the Electoral Commission Bill 2023, and the House of Assembly Elections Petitions Rules 2023. So, Phase 1. Phase 1 of the report deals with the Registration of Electors Act, which will henceforth be referred to as the new Registration of Electors Act 2023. This, in substance, I would suggest, reflects the existing Registration of Electors Act. And it is intended to repeal and replace the existing Registration of Electors Act. The most significant parts of the proposed new Registration of Electors Act, from a reform or modernization perspective, are, I suggest, parts 3 and 4, which introduce new concepts and provisions intended to give effect to the report's recommendations in relation to the registration of electors. And Phase 1 at Part 3 sets out a number of issues and requirements which must be satisfied in order for a person's name to be entered or to remain in the register of electors. And I suggest that those can be encapsulated under 5 heads. 1, residency; 2, registration; 3, identification cards; 4, investigation; and 5, confirmation. I also suggest that those 5 heads together effectively result in a verification process. Residency, the first of those verification requirements, can be said to be comprised of 2 distinct components. You have residency, which relates to the registration of a person. So that's, I would suggest, the first component. The second is residency as it relates to the circumstance in which a person can be deprived of his or her entitlement to remain registered and to vote. The first component is addressed at Clause 7.1c of the new Registration of Electors Act, and requires that a person applying for registration must have been resident in the polling district for a period of at least 3 months of continuous residence immediately preceding the application for registration. That is exactly as it is in the existing legislation. That is to say, you have to be living, or a person would have to be living in the particular polling district for 3 months so as to be able to apply and be registered as a voter. The other component is provided for in Clause 26.1 of the new Registration of Electors Act, and proposes a dramatic change to the existing situation and definition of absent from Dominica. The current reference to being absent from Dominica is found at Section 7 of the existing Registration of Electors Act, and simply provides that if a person has been absent from Dominica for a period of 5 years, that he or she should be removed from the register. That obviously means that if a person has come to Dominica at least once within a 5-year period, that they should not be removed from the register. What Sir Dennis proposes is that Clause 26.1, which states, as you may be able to see on the screen, a person whose name is in the register of electors and who lives outside of Dominica shall not be regarded as having been absent from Dominica for purposes of Section 12b(2), 13(4)b, or 15(3)b, if in the 5-year period immediately preceding the date of the last publication of the Register of Electors, the person visited and remained in Dominica for a period of at least 90 or 50 days, or for periods amounting in aggregate to at least 90 or 50 days. It should be immediately apparent that 90 days is a lot more than 1 day. That is to say, what Sir Dennis is proposing is that a person would have to be in Dominica for at least 90 days within that 5-year period so as to retain their entitlement to remain on the register. Or alternatively, he says that if Dominica is not willing to go with 90 days, then perhaps they would want to think of 50 as an alternative. That's something that you will have to consider, you may already have considered, and certainly the whole consultation process will have to consider as to whether we should go that way, or one of the other ways that has been suggested, even during the process of the consultation so far, which includes a suggestion that there should be no limitation at all. The second element is the right to remain registered, which I've already referred to, and that is impacted by Section 26, in that Section 26 will increase the period a registered person would have to spend in Dominica, and that's provided for at clause 12b2 of the proposed new legislation. The second aspect of that is increasing the number of people who would lose their right to remain registered and would therefore have to have their names removed from the register, which is referred to at clauses 13.4b and 15.3b of the new legislation, if it is enacted. The second head is registration. So Dennis's proposals in respect to registration do not depart significantly from the existing law in relation to what's required to register. There are two areas in which, two new recommendations. One relates to 17-year-olds being permitted to apply for registration, though their names would not be added to the register physically until they had actually attained the age of 18. The second is a provision that would allow for state employees stationed overseas, for example, those in the diplomatic corps, to be deemed resident at a specified address which they would have previously provided to the Chief Registering Officer, supported by a declaration that is prior to them departing or prior to the actual electoral process. So those two recommendations are the only two changes as it relates to, or substantive changes as it relates to registration. The third area of verification that's included is identification cards. The change here would be that Sir Dennis proposes that identification cards be made mandatory, the use of them for the purpose of voting. As it currently stands, Section 19 of the current legislation proposes that identification cards may be used, but it's not a mandatory requirement. It would become a mandatory requirement by way of Clause 11 of the proposed legislation, and in that circumstance, everybody would have to use identification cards. And of course, there will be some discussion, and if you read the draft legislation and Sir Dennis's report, you will realize that he suggests inclusion of various features, whether it be fingerprints or other biometric or other details. The fourth component of verification is investigation, and this has two components, essentially. Three. The first is an increased discretion to the registering officer and the electoral officials. That's provided by way of Clause 9. And it would give the officials greater discretion as regards the nature of information that they are authorized to require from, for example, an occupier of a building. And that would be useful in terms of the verification of people at an address, whether somebody is alive or dead, whether somebody is within the jurisdiction or outside, and so forth. And the other, perhaps very important, is the creation of a new offence, which would be an offence if a person refused to furnish the information that was requested, or if a person provided false information to the Chief Registering Officer. And that's provided for at clause 9.5 of the proposed new legislation. The second component is a specific investigative power given to the Chief Registering Officer by way of clause 10 as to allow for the Chief Registration Officer to actually carry out investigations to verify details as regards the electoral information provided and the reports. And the third, which is a very new, or would be a very new innovation, and was referred to by the chairperson in her opening remarks indirectly, relates to a requirement that would be imposed upon public officers to provide information to the Chief Registration Officer. Clause 27 of the proposed new Registration of Electors Act proposes that, for example, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, by a particular date, every year would be required to submit to the CRO a report containing, as at the date of the report, the name of every person who A, is in service overseas, B, is a registered elector or eligible to be, and C, is no longer in service overseas. The second category of individual who would be required to provide information is the chairman of the Mental Health Review Board, who would be required, again by a specified date, following each quarter, be required to ensure that the following details and information regarding the person who has been certified as having a mental disorder as defined under the Mental Health Act is provided to the CRO. That would be the name, street address, date of birth, and occupation. Clearly, there may be issues as to privacy and so forth in relation to that, but those are issues that no doubt will arise during the consultation process. The fifth and final element of the verification process is the confirmation process provided for at Part 5, clauses 50 to 56, which would require, within a specified time, following the enactment of the proposed legislation, that the Electoral Commission would be required to declare a confirmation period. And that confirmation period would be initially for 6 months, but could extend for no more than 9 months. But during that period, all those who are actually on the list, who require to remain on the list, would be required to confirm their registration. And if they fail to do so, they would be removed from the list. Clearly, that is an important proposal. Moving to phase 2 of the report. So Dennis describes phase 2 as being, as I indicated, primarily seeking to address institutional matters, and the report seeks to, or reflects that in the 4 pieces of legislation that I referred to. The first of those institutional matters is access to the media. That's addressed at clause 50 of part 3 of the House of Assembly Elections Act. Clause 50 provides, or seeks to provide, for a substantive change to our electoral landscape, namely by providing that all political parties and independent candidates would be entitled to have access to state-owned media during the campaign period, and the campaign period is defined in the proposed legislation. The report proposes that access must be on the principles of total impartiality, non-discrimination, and equal time, and the Electoral Commission will be required to monitor the equitable airtime and issue directives as necessary to media agencies. That would be related to the publicly owned media enterprises, and as far as the proposal put forward by Sir Dennis is concerned, it does not impact privately owned media. That's an area that may generate some discussion, but that's, so far as Sir Dennis's proposal goes, it's confined to the public entities. Clauses 51 to 53 at Part 4 deal with electronic voting systems. Sir Dennis proposes that it would be desirable to move to the use of an electronic voting system at a point at which, for the conduct of elections, at a point at which Dominica and the electoral system has in place all the checks and balances that are required to ensure that such a system could work effectively and efficiently to enhance the electoral process. The third and perhaps most substantive proposal for change by Sir Dennis in this phase 2 is at Part 5, clauses 54 to 75, which deals with campaign financing. Clauses 54 to 63 deal with campaign contributions, addresses things like the limits that his report proposes that there should be on such contributions, what would contribute or constitute acceptance of a contribution, in what circumstances a person or political party, or I should say a candidate or a political party, would be required to return a contribution. For example, the Sir Dennis proposes that contributions from foreign entities should not be allowed, and therefore, of course, if according to what he proposes, if a candidate or political party were to receive a contribution from a foreign entity, that they would be required to return it. It also proposes for forfeiture of contributions in certain circumstances, what are the permissible uses that can be made of contributions, and for record keeping. Clauses 64 to 65 address campaign expenditure and essentially focuses on the limits that there should be according to Sir Dennis. Clauses 66 to 75 deal with reports and the submission of reports and audited returns, and for publication of reports by the Electoral Commission. Those provisions, or within those provisions, Sir Dennis also proposes for certain offences and maximum penalties, ranging from 6,000 or 12 months imprisonment in respect to an offence under Clause 57(3) to $10,000 or 12 months imprisonment in respect to an offence in relation to Clause 70. Sir Dennis, in relation to the Electoral Commission, made various proposals. The report makes the recommendation for changes to be made in relation to the Commission. Principal among these are that the introduction of an Electoral Commission Act, which we do not now have, and specifically, Sir Dennis proposes that there should be financial autonomy to the Commission. And that proposal is at Clause 12, and under that includes proposals for the establishment of an Electoral Commission Fund, which would provide or manage the funding, so to speak, for the Commission to secure that autonomy that he suggests. He proposes an annual payment of a specified amount into the fund from national or central government funds, the Consolidated Fund, and he also proposes for the administration of that fund. He proposes for staffing as well, and suggests that the Commission should have a level of autonomy in determining the level, etc., of its staffing. And Clause 8 of the Electoral Commission Act proposes autonomy in staffing, as I've indicated, and disclosure of interests, which would require members of the Commission or members of any committee established by the Commission or the Chief Elections Officer, or indeed any employee of the Commission who may have a private interest in any matter being considered, would be required by Clause 19 to disclose that interest. Those are, I suggest, the substantive areas that may generate your or pique your interest in the conversation in relation to this consultation. The chairperson highlighted a number of questions that will obviously have to be given consideration to during the course of this consultation. I'm sure that that will be contributed to tonight. I look forward to listening to those contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney General, for the synopsis of the report. I know that a lot is contained in the report, and it's difficult to condense it into just a few minutes, but thank you for so expertly managing it. We would like everyone to have an opportunity to speak, so we ask that you keep your interventions to the point and as brief as possible so that everyone gets a chance to express their views on the report. And when you take the floor, please indicate who you are and then make your comments. You have the option of either making your comments from where you are, there's a roving mic that will be provided to you, or you may use the podium here as well. I ask that we all respect each other's point of view and we allow people to share their comments uninterrupted. The sessions are being recorded and the transcribers are taking notes of all your points. So I would, without further ado, open the floor, and who would like the floor to speak now to share their comments? All right. Thank you. Just please state your name, please, for the record.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Robinson Amor. I am the president of the Dominica Medical Association. My question comes down to the chairman of the APU being able to certify people whether or not they're able to vote or not. Am I being heard clearly?
Yeah.
So my concern comes with whether or not the chairman of the APU should be given the privilege to decide if a patient with mental disorders should be able to vote. Now, a patient with mental disorder is a very wide range of patients, and most of us are walking through the community fine, with mental health taken care of. Even we have a diagnosis of anxiety, depression, or otherwise. And so what criteria is suggested for the APU team to decide who can vote?
Okay,
Or what mental illnesses would exclude somebody from being able to vote?
from what I read from the document of Sir Dennis, it talks about a mental disorder as defined by the Mental Health Act. And the information is to be sent on a regular basis to the Chief Elections Officer. That's what is being provided for in the draft legislation now.
So just help me clarify. So anybody who is diagnosed with a mental disorder according to the APU and the Mental Health Act cannot vote?
I think that's what the intention is.
Because that's what I'm understanding.
What I would say to you is that the requirement there is for the information to be transmitted to the Chief Elections Officer.
For what benefit?
Sorry, just to be clear, the Mental Health Act defines mental disorder as mental illness or mental deficiency, however caused or manifested.
That is
Yes, it is very broad. It is very broad. Now, I can only assume that that provision is put in there because there is a disqualification in the legislation if you are, if you give me the right provision, please. If you are of unsound mind, I believe. It refers to unsound mind.
But who makes that determination? That's, okay, I might be of unsound mind today, but properly medicated, I am a very sound mind and a very, participating part of society. So
I agree with you, and I understand what you're saying,
okay.
and this is the whole purpose of having this discussion. So we have to look at all of the provisions and see whether they're actually workable and what impact it would have. So I'm very glad that you made that point. So that has been noted. Thank you.
I had planned to speak later, but she has, and we spoke earlier, we met earlier. But
Can I have your name, sir, please?
I'm Dr. Darius DeQuent,
Thank you.
PhD in Research and Statistics, and JD. My interest is in the Constitution, and she raised an important question, because only the Constitution can determine who can vote. We cannot interpret the law to violate the Constitution. The people can pass whatever laws they want. The only proviso is that every law must agree with the Constitution. And I want to bring to our attention 4th section of the Constitution, section 51, which says that anything that is going to affect our elections must be sent to the Electoral Commission. Section 103 of the Constitution, which says that if anyone, and it implies anywhere, alleges that any provision of the Constitution has been violated, they can apply to the High Court for a declaration. That is actually a very interesting provision, because that provision is only found in 14 constitutions around the world. Only 14 countries. All of them are members of the Commonwealth. And 4 of them are in the Caribbean, and all of them are from the OECS. It's not in Jamaica or Trinidad or Barbados or Guyana. It's only in Antigua, Dominica, St. Kitts, St. Lucia, St. Vincent. Then there is section 117 of the Constitution, which is not, by the way, I should also say that I am an American citizen. I sold my flag in 1996, which is where I got my law degree. Section 117 of our Constitution says that our Constitution is the supreme law. And anything that violates that Constitution is void. So if you do anything that violates the Constitution, and the learned judge will understand the concept of poison tree and poison fruit, so anything that follows from the poison tree is also disqualified. So if the police search my house unconstitutionally and find evidence that makes me guilty, that doesn't get accepted in court because it has violated the Constitution. The problem we have is this. Last night, I heard, well, for the last three sessions that I've attended, I've heard people admit to violating the Constitution. In fact, admit to planning to commit a crime. I've heard misstatements, all of which makes what we're doing subject to being void. Let me explain. The right to, by the way, Mr. Prime Minister, last time you said that the right to vote is a fundamental right. It is not. It is a constitutional right. Our fundamental rights are Section 1, Article 1 to 15 of the Constitution. These are our fundamental rights. The right to vote is constitutional, but it's not fundamental. The question that bothered me last night was when the Prime Minister said that the report is Mr. Byron's report. It is not his report, which is correct, but that he had delegated to the Electoral Commission all the things to Mr. Byron. And then you said last night that the plan is to bring what comes from this to Parliament. Both of these statements violate the Constitution. Because in your statement, it represents a plan to violate the Constitution.
Let me just correct you, right? Coming out of these consultations, right, there is draft legislation that, as per the requirements, will go to the Electoral Commission, and their feedback be given on it as well, and it will be taken to Parliament.
Thanks for that.
So the Electoral Commission, and that is why the Electoral Commission was a central part of the consultation that Sir Dennis was doing.
Thanks for
And
that
that is
correction.
why that the work of Sir Dennis was handled by the Commission,
Thanks.
not by the government.
Thanks for that correction, because it brings me now back to Section 51. Because the Section 117 implicates the court, so that if a law is passed in Parliament that I object to, I can go to the court and the court will decide whether it's constitutional or not. But the Parliament cannot go to the courts before it passes a law and ask the court to give us guidance as to how to pass this law so that it is not unconstitutional. They cannot do that because that's a violation of separation of powers. They have to pass the law, and then if I object as a citizen, I take it to court and the court corrects it. So that what you just said is also a violation of the Constitution, because when Sir Byron called the chief election officer, called the election commission, he was serving as an agent of either the Prime Minister or Cabinet. The Prime Minister cannot speak to the Electoral Commission because it's an independent body. But when Sir Byron spoke to the Commission, he was violating the Constitution because he had no constitutional authority to speak to the Electoral Commission. So by your admission, he violated the Constitution. Now, I'm not saying that what we're doing here is irrelevant. I'm saying that it is constitutionally meaningless. It is not a waste of time. It is valid. So that is that. Now, and here I come to you, family. Last night you made a statement which troubled me, which you said that our laws, our electoral laws, have been followed through, and we're not reforming because we think the laws are bad, but because we want to come up to date. The problem is that just because you have good laws doesn't mean you follow them. And I listened to Sir Byron make a statement to the Dominica Business Forum in which he made this statement. He said, in the last election, in the 1919 election, 2019 election, we had a bloated electoral list. And he said, he inquired, and the chief election officer told him that the reason why he did not cull the list is because there was not a sufficiently acceptable definition of absence. That bothered me because he was in fact telling us that the chief election officer refused to obey the law because in his consideration, the law did not mean what it felt absence meant. Well, that is a decision for the courts to make. So we have a problem here because it means that no matter what we produce here, if, as Sir Byron says, anyone can refuse to follow it, which is what the chief executive has done, because his responsibility under the law is to do what the law says, and then if I object to my name being removed, then the courts will decide. The chief executive officer cannot decide on his own merit that I don't like this provision and therefore I won't do it. And which brings me to one more thing. I don't want to speak too long. When I first returned to Dominica in 2018, I was confronted with a problem which I observed that, and I've been thinking about election concerns before that. And what bothered me is I find Dominica to be in a unique situation. It is what I call a natural experiment. Dominica has done something that no other country has been able to do. It is the only country in the world that appeals to the authority of a constitution that it does not recognize. Every other country does it differently. Every country recognizes the constitution. I'll tell you why we don't. We are the only country in which we have, for the entire life of the constitution, refused to do what the constitution says. And as a researcher, I spoke to a former president, well, there's only one former president, and I asked him, what's that about? how did that happen? He said, that's an embarrassment, yes, and I'm sorry. And I said, what do we do next? He said, it's water on the bridge. Well, sorry, it's not water on the bridge because unlike laws, the Constitution cannot be changed by practice. The Constitution says how it can be changed. It must be done by a certain process. So by not doing it doesn't mean it no longer exists. And Section 108 of the Constitution says that there shall be a parliamentary commissioner. We've never had one. So we've never implemented our Constitution ever. Because the Constitution is not an aspirational document. It's a factual document. It represents who we are. And it says, the next section says that the president shall appoint a parliamentary commissioner. We've had 10 presidents. Not one of them has appointed a parliamentary commissioner. And so the question that we come down to is this. Only the Constitution can tell us who can vote, because it's a constitutional right. And so the doctor is right to ask the question. You cannot tell them to tell the Electoral Commission who is mad and who is not mad, because you're now imposing on your rights. And as I said before, what we're doing here, because the other thing we also violated everything about election petitions is totally unconstitutional. I wrote to the OECS bar about this, and they did not respond to me because they don't want to, because they cannot deal with what I asked them to do, which is a problem when government officials cannot do something. I also had a situation where I filed a matter in the court on the 25th of May this year.
So if we
Yes.
can restrict this to the discussion on the report, please.
No, but the report is about elections. It's about
Yes, but
elections.
you're talking about a personal matter that you have before
Oh, no,
the court.
no.
So
No,
let's,
no,
let's,
it doesn't matter about
let's
elections.
restrict it, because there are a lot of people who would like to be heard
No, I'm just
the
saying
matters as well.
that if we're going to have laws made, because what I did in court is about elections, from May to now, I have gone back to the court. The court has refused to deal with the matter because it's an election matter. My point is, if we have laws that we don't follow, the laws mean nothing. That's all I'm saying. And so,
Thank
in
you.
conclusion, just let's be aware that what we do that violates the Constitution is absolutely and completely void.
Thank you for your contribution. Just to be clear, Section 51 of the Constitution that was being referred to states that every proposed bill and every proposed regulation or other instrument having the force of law relating to the registration of electors for the purpose of electing representatives or to the election of representatives and senators shall be referred to the Electoral Commission and to the Chief Elections Officer at such time as shall give them sufficient opportunity to make comments thereon before the bill is introduced in the House, or as the case may be, the regulation or other instrument is made. I don't think there's any suggestion that that would not be honored and respected and applied. Would anybody else like to come in? Mr. LeBlanc? Come on.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Protocol having been established, I will go right to the point. I'm not sure how much time I'm going to be given, but if nobody else wants to make a contribution, I would like to continue if I'm cut off. So tonight, I'm going to look at two areas: gamemanship and the intertwining of issues. And I'd like to take a moment to remember Curtis Augustus, because Curtis Augustus was one of the stalwarts of the trade union movement who, in his last years, spent 8 months of his life with us in the Electoral Reform Group project. And we would not like to see him die in vain, because he fought for that too. So let's speak about circumventing gamemanship in electoral reform, because that's something we need to do. I refer to page 11 to 12 of the final report of the Electoral Reform Group. And it says, moreover, having regard to the nature of the debate currently taking place respecting electoral reform, the group is of the opinion that there is an issue of public confidence in the genuine interests and industry towards the current electoral reform effort. And that was in August 2019, my friends. We are almost 4 years down the line, and we are still playing that game. This process should have a final goal, that we do not leave out the possibility that we continue just to talk around the issues. We have been doing that far too long, and we need to bring it to a close. There have been multiple concerns with electoral reform process and the gamemanship aimed at steering the electoral reform process to the benefit of one party or the other. The electoral reform ought to be geared in a manner in which persons can choose to be represented, which in turn affects the place where they work, live, recreate, and worship. It ought to protect the electors as a body. So there is no doubt that there is a huge perception that the process of reform can become a sham to legislate matters not ordinarily legislated in a democratic society, that democratic society would frown upon, and in the converse, to fail to legislate provisions which would enhance the fairness of the electoral process. So quoting again from that final report, the report said, to put it simply, what the group wants to achieve is that the public will perceive that whoever wins the next constitutionally due general election has done so fairly, and that the people will go back to working and building the country. And that's what we want from this process. Is that where we are going? So I want to focus now on the matters that are linked and intertwined. And I first want to start with the consultative process, for which we are expected to get acceptable legislation. So what's the aim of this consultation? Is it that, and I imagine it is, to endanger a more acceptable ensuing electoral legislation by the majority of those who are advocating for that reform on all sides of the divide? And how can we improve the legitimacy and the perception in the entire process? And to be fair and productive, how much time is adequate? And how much notice is adequate to be given? And how much time is adequate to be allocated to vocalizing the concern and submission? How convenient are the presentation? For example, tonight I asked to be able to project my presentation, and I was not afforded that. Would that have made the presentation of persons consulted better? The current reports are fairly large for the average person, and it takes time. June 2023 is not much time if you are fully employed, have family commitments or other commitments. We have to get time in between. So we have to be fair about whether or not we really want to be consulted and we want to hear from people. How important is that consultation process to us in the electoral reform process? Given the many unresolved issues, this ad hoc consultation process must get to somewhere. And what do we have in place for it to get somewhere? We need to have some means of consolidating what we have done and ticking them. Where do I find the issues that we want to resolve, and where do I find which issues were dealt with? Or are we always starting back from day one? On Monday evening, I believe, Mrs. Didier recommended a mode of going forward. That there's a cadre of representatives of different walks who can be obtained to work with the Electoral Commission to finalize that process. From my hearing, I do not think that went well with the chairman. I may be wrong, but the point is, do we really want to go forward? And given the number of unresolved issues, I would say, and I may be wrong, somebody may say that I was involved, so I shouldn't say that, but I would tend to think from public comment that the greatest confidence that public had in electoral reform effort process was undoubtedly that 8-month period when the electoral effort reform group consisting of church, business, and civil society was involved from January 2019 to August 2019, and actually went up to the election day. I think those are things that we shouldn't throw under the table. And we can add political parties to that, to a group such as that, and go forward. But we also have to bear in mind that not everybody can do it free. I may have spent a full month of that 8-month period of my time in that, working time. But not everybody can do it free. And the fact is, everybody here who is involved in electoral reform from the government side is paid. But there are a lot of civil society persons who, if they have to dedicate that effort to consolidate things for electoral reform, consideration needs to be made to remunerating them. Just as the commissioners are remunerated and who are tasked with electoral process. Some of us may still want to do it on a voluntary basis, but I think in order to get things going, we need to look at remunerating people who make that effort and give this service. And we have to go back to the consultative process and see whether the Electoral Commission should be part of this process. And how we can really engender the independence of the Electoral Commission and keep it from the administrative branch of government. We hear of somebody for electoral advancement in the administrative branch. But does that give the perception of transparency and the perception of moving forward with the electoral reform process? Or does it give the perception, and I don't think any one political party should want that perception that the political party is tilting the reform process in its interests. I think that should never be, because if that happens, there'll never be a place of electoral peace. And I don't think any political party should allow itself to have that perception that I am tilting the process to my favor. And therefore, the administrative branch should have pulled itself away from the process and allow the Electoral Commission to do that. So we need to look at those things when we're looking at consultation, sparing the consultation and dealing with it. As the Electoral Reform Group said in its press statement on 5th December 2019, credible electoral reform should enhance the constitutional provision respecting the composition, financing, independence, and powers of the Electoral Commission. So, intertwining that campaign financing and financing of the Electoral Commission and its independence, we need to look at how, if the Electoral Commission spearhead reform process, how can it really pull away from the electoral administrative branch. And one way that can be done, can we, for example, in the provision and proceedings for campaign financing, look at financing the Electoral Commission and financing its independence? And why not? We have track record where the IRC, for example, and Electoral are financed by the utility users and utility companies. Why shouldn't the electors and political parties finance the electoral system and the regulatory body that governs elections? And wouldn't that be one of the greatest incentives to make sure that campaign finance regulation is properly administered? So let us look at other areas that are intertwined and linked. illicit registration, confirmation, electoral lists, equitable representation. As the Commonwealth Observer Mission said after election 2014, the list currently complies with legislation, but it is widely discredited. There appears to be credible public appetite for the revision of legislation guiding the compilation of voters' register and for elections to be more reflective of the wishes of persons resident in the Commonwealth of Dominica. The observers found that was what was on the ground. So why do we speak about verification and confirmation? One of the reasons is that there is a perception of illicit practices in the registration process. In the last 2 elections, there were allegations that Haitians were non-Commonwealth citizens and were registering, and also persons who were registering in multiple places. For example, I could have registered I go to Vickers. If say I go to Vickers every weekend, I can seem to be resident in Vickers, and I can register as Anthony Libla in Vickers. And in Trafalgar, I register as Edmond Libla. There seemed to have been that perception. Hence the confirmation process. Ought to be aimed at ensuring that existing registered electors had a legitimate right to be registered in a polling district. And that has to come, I suppose, to ensuring that you're a citizen, you're in the polling district that you're a resident, and you have a unique identity. But let's go to other areas. How are electors represented in Parliament? 7,000 electors equals to 1 vote from a constituency. 2,000 electors equal to the same 1 vote in a constituency. Is it equitable representation? So can we have electoral reform without looking at constituency boundary reform? The Commonwealth Observer Mission in 2014 says the current electoral boundaries are out of date and a fresh delimitation exercise should be conducted to equalize the size of constituencies. And further, the Joint Special Mission to Dominica in 2019 of Commonwealth OS and CARICOM, in the report of 17th September 2019 said, the Constitution stipulates that all constituencies shall contain as nearly equal members of inhabitants as appears to the Constituency Boundaries Commission to be reasonably practicable. For the December 2014 parliamentary elections, the size of the constituencies ranged from a low of 1564 to a high of 7446, further highlighting the need to review of existing electoral boundaries. So can we have electoral reform without looking at that?
Sorry, we have I'm going to share your presentation as well, so I want you to just, probably moving on faster.
You want me to speak faster? Okay, I will do that.
I just have your presentation.
Sure. I mean,
Just to take us to a conversation.
and as I said before, if I need to take a break and the other people are coming, that's fine. So can I just finish on that area? Okay, good. So let us also look at a scenario which exists in many countries and definitely have existed several times in Dominica. What happens to the voice of a significant proportion of our people in a constituency when it is won by 2 persons, 2 votes out of 7,000 registered voters? A candidate gets 2,914 votes, another one gets 2,912 votes. And the winner takes it all, but almost 50% of the electors, the person that they put forward to represent them, have no official means of vocalizing their concerns, their needs, and what they desire. Can we sit and carve out a legislative device to cater for this common reality in our electoral landscape, where a candidate who gets 30% of the votes and 2% or 5% less than the winner, can that candidate become a senator? Can that candidate be in a position to represent that almost 50% of the voters? So, Madam Chair, if you allow me to come back, I will, because we're in a consultative process. And thank you for not debating with me while we speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leblanc. Please be reminded you can share with us your full presentation. Would anybody else like the floor? Dr. Joseph, would you like to sit from here, or? Yes, we do.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Janora Joseph. Oh, yes, okay. All right. President of the Dominica Association of Professional Engineers. I will get straight to the point, and I promise to be concise. All right. So, on the matter of confirmation of registration for voters, I note that failure to register results in a voter being removed. Is that correct? Now, I do not see that there is any onus on the voter to provide this information, nor is there any mention of whether it will constitute an offense if a voter fails to offer information that represents their circumstances at the time of registration. So I propose that this is something that be considered in the electoral reform bill.
All right.
Am I clear in what I just said, or should I expound?
Perhaps you might want to explain it a little bit more. I think I know what you're referring to.
So I will refer to my time spent in exile, self-imposed as a matter of fact, in England. And I remember when I became eligible to vote in the UK as a Commonwealth citizen, a voter card, registration card, was sent to my address. That was the address that I registered at the last voting cycle. And I was informed, in addition to this card, that I was supposed to provide correct information on my circumstances. Failure to do so would be an offense, and there was a penalty applied. So in so doing, it relieved the Electoral Commission of the process of removing voters who really and truly still are eligible to vote, but they just failed to engage in the process. And also it made it necessary for you as a voter to ensure that the information you provided to the Commission was correct and represented your current circumstances in terms of address and so on.
Okay, but in specific to the confirmation process itself, that is being suggested in the Act. Dr. Joseph, before you give away the mic, in the proposed bill, it's suggesting that persons who are on the register now will go through a confirmation process, where they would have to provide their biometric information, provide information on where they reside and so on. And in relation to persons who reside outside of Dominica, I would expect that there would be some requirement to show that they are not disqualified based on the provisions of the Act. Now, based on what you're saying now, are you saying that the onus should be on the person to let the Electoral Commission know that they would want to remain on the register?
Otherwise, you run the risk of people just being apathetic about the process and not filling out any registration and getting removed from the list. And whereas they are actually eligible to vote. So I think it should be something that is mandatory. Because I can foresee a situation where a wide swath of Dominicans will just ignore the fact that they need to register. And we have a list that is considerably slimmed down with people who are actually eligible to vote, but they just did not engage in the process. So I think there should be some incentive, and usually it is basically making it an offense to not engage in the process, so that people have to ensure that they remain registered if they are eligible to do so.
Okay, we'll take note of that. Thank you. Dr. Jajak?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. have a lot to say. So I'm going to be brief. And of course, if somebody is generous, later on you could call me on to take your spot. I'll continue what I have to say. Mr. Libla mentioned something which just pricked me and I had to stand. I want to be up there, but as I said,
You can come. If you're more comfortable to speak from here, you can do so.
I like to face persons when you can't see. But it's all right. I'm going to be short. I have gone through the report. I have my name is Dr. Jean-Jacques, PhD in political science. I have more expert in elections, for democracy, political organization, foreign relations. These are my area. So I understand this thing about elections and how parties get involved and they just, etc., etc. So I developed my own little lens. I'm going to share this document with the team afterwards. I developed my own analytical lens to understand, to interpret Mr. Byron's reports. There are some things that I like, and I have said it so in my document. But the report missed the mark, because Sir Byron came in because there was fire. Well, there was some fire, but not real fire. But he was brought in as some arbiter, because he was seen as this noble wise man who could bring some semblance of objectivity and some peace. Because it appears we couldn't sit and talk among ourselves. How did we get to that point is to be the crux of the matter. We got to that point because a party had a false narrative that somebody, some way, somehow, stole elections from them. And that party went on for years and years and years, repeating that same false narrative, confusing its supporters, programming them into believing that the only way to get back into office is through some sort of civil strife, civil disobedience, twaka, as they would say. So that is how we got there. I haven't seen how the report, the recommendations address that core matter, which I call a campaign of disinformation and fake news, an epidemic of disinformation and fake news polluting the media. That's the heart of the problem. That's what, unless we fix that, we are going to be here from now till 100 years talking about cleansing lists. All these things are important and nice, but I guarantee all of us here, let us try fixing that epidemic of rumors and disinformation where somebody, I listen to all the talk shows, every one of them is my business, that's my field. I listened to a program once on opposition radio where at some point somebody was reading part of some email that was sent some years ago indicating about legacy and somebody advising PM not to go into the legacy. And for the first time I heard what came beyond the word legacy in that email. I was stunned. So I got a copy of that email and I read it and I thought, but gee whiz, I wonder if the opposition supporters know that they have been duped. Because if you read that email, the sense and the meaning that has been given in opposition radio is very, very different from reality. But they have put it hook, line, and sinker. Of course, they respect the leaders, they adore them, etc. So they put the narrative. And they are in the street throwing stones. In 2017, I remember very clearly, we took a bundle, donated a bundle of bills to be debated. And the result was mayhem. I was there in the parliament, so I know. And from then on, it hasn't been quiet, it hasn't been peaceful. Why? Because a core of motivated, hardcore supporters is convinced that somebody violated the election, bringing in Haitians to vote, how many planes overnight, all sorts of stuff which cannot be explained and proven in any conversation. No cogent argument. No authority has come and say, okay, elections, this and that, will void because X. So, one recommendation I have. We need laws against this information. It's about time. I keep hearing this noises on the radio. Everybody say anything. Just say anything. And they run with it. Somebody has a smartphone, they see a picture of what it is, that's what the gardens. And it is all over the place. And nobody say, hey, stop. Stop. Let some common sense prevail. I say stop. I think Sabaron has done a good job. I've interacted with him myself because there was something I had to call him out on something I saw he was I wasn't pleased with it at all. But we have missed the mark, and I hope it's not too late for us to pass legislation that will help us. But in other words, you can't have all these nice things there, and the context in which we seek to implement all these nice things here, it is still a problem context, my friends. Otherwise, well, it's a nice meeting and I'm talking with you, but it's really, really wasting time. Thank you. I can come back with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jajak. Yes, please.
Also, good evening, everybody. My name is Isaac Baptiste. I'm a technical professional. For those of you who may not know, I was also a member of the House of Assembly Senator for the period 2014-2019, and as well, President of the United Workers' Party up to November of 2022. The discussion and opportunity to discuss this evening is good. But I would like to first speak to some issues that were raised by Senior Counsel Tony Astafans when he made his presentations, first night of the consultation and last night as well with the political parties. He made statements to the effect that, notwithstanding all the complaints by those who were talking about electoral reform and the bloated voters list, no one has made representation objecting to persons on that voters list. Mr. Astafan was either uninformed or mischievous in his statement. I say this because, as President of the United Workers' Party, we, on numerous occasions, wrote to the Electoral Commission making and requesting and pointing out to names on the electoral list that should not be there. When I contested in 2014, over 400 names were submitted to the Electoral Commission. None was attended to. 2019 general elections, we submitted names to the point where I, as a president of the party, wrote to the chief elections officer, pointing to him the fact that we need these names, these complaints attended to, these objections. The process was aborted with the calling of elections for December 2019. And the chief elections officer replied to the effect that, I have the letters here, I will not go into them, to the effect that he cannot attend to them anymore because under the legislation that once the writ is issued by the president, then he can only have 5 days to look at issues. Having been so informed, I again, as in my capacity as president of the United Workers' Party, wrote to His Excellency, the President of Dominica, pointing out these concerns and pointing out to him that he, under the Constitution, has authority that he can even postpone the election for up to 30 days or thereabout to allow these issues to be addressed if he so desires. This was never done. So I just wanted this to be clear, that it is untrue to say that persons have been talking about the list and they're not objecting to names on the list. It was not attended to because of the 2019 general elections. The process was aborted. with the calling of elections. Likewise, this issue of electoral reform that has been burning in Dominica for since 2005, we are getting close in 2022 with the reports of Sir Dennis Barrow. This report that we are now discussing, the process was aborted when the Prime Minister called elections in 2022 and 2022. That process was aborted, and we're back where we are. And I'm asking myself, Isaac Baptist, what is happening here? Because Dominicans, professionals, political parties have submitted reports. We have experts coming from overseas to observe our elections. The very discussions that we are having here and recommendations have been discussed and recommended in every report for the past 15 years or more. And the process that is now going on, like we are starting all over again. When will it end? When will the process end? If we are really serious about electoral reform and getting the process done. Ladies and gentlemen, most of the issues that I said have been discussed now, have been discussed already. The question is, when they are discussed again, and having paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to discuss the same issues, and we're back on the same issues again, what is the process of taking those recommendations we are discussing going forward? Come on and go forward with it. How are we going forward with them? What is I've not heard. The report and the recording that we are doing, the transcript that we are taking, what happens to it after that? Attorney at law, Nellis Knight Didier, made a recommendation for going forward with this issue and getting it resolved as quick as possible. I strongly advise and urge those in power and authority to adopt that recommendation. That is, to set up a committee that will work with the Electoral Commission, a broad-based committee, that will take these recommendations, put it into, adjust the draft bills as necessary, and therefore that will represent what will be discussed and then will go to Parliament. Otherwise, we are just going back in circles. We are just going back in circles, and this thing has need to stop. Mr. Leblanc made the point about the Boundaries Commission. This is a very important point. You may not want to see it as an issue for electoral reform, and it's not directly related to electoral reform. But if we are talking about electoral reform and we've using the word, replacing it with modernization, the issue of the boundaries of the various constituencies must come into play, particularly with respect to the question of registration of voters. I prefer and advise and suggest that the preferred should be to have a complete re-registration of voters so you can register voters in a constituency where they reside. Over the last years, particularly over the last 20 years, I'm a development planner. There has been considerable movement of persons, the population, in new communities, new residential areas, new residential neighborhoods. And therefore, for example, I live at Castle Bruce, I live at Castle Comfort as well. I can register at Castle Bruce. I can also register at Castle Comfort. There are persons because of marriage, because of employment. So the disparity in the population in the various constituencies is very wide because of population shift. Wallace, Castle Comfort, all these areas were developed over the last 20 years. Warner and those areas. There is no functional relationship between many of the communities that are within a constituency. So if we are arguing that the reasons why we want to have persons, my brothers and sisters, etc., living overseas, to be able to vote for functional reasons because they have a relationship with the country, then why would you want persons who have no functional relationship in a community, in a constituency, where they have no interest in being a member of a village council, etc., etc.? So I would strongly suggest that while the discussion is going on, the Boundaries Commission should be activated to look at that issue. So by the time we decide and finalize that voters list and proceed to re-registration, that will have those issues of the boundaries completely reviewed and persons will register in the boundary, in the constituency where they reside. I'm suggesting that this be considered very, very, very strongly. The issue of the voters list. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not in a country where elections or constituencies are won by thousands of votes. In 2005, Castlereagh constituency won by 1 vote. La Plaine, 3 or 4 votes. Grand 4, 5 votes. So if you have a voters list that is not proper, is not correct, is bloated, the results of the constituency is right there, can be very, very impacted. This is why it is critical that we make sure that the voters list that we have and we adopted is right. The names that are there deserve to be there and have a right to be there, because 1 vote can decide who wins the constituency. It doesn't happen in Castlereagh. 5 votes can decide who wins a constituency. That happened in Grand Form. 2 votes can decide who wins a constituency. It happened in La Plaine. So therefore, the decision and the approach we take as to how we claim the voters list is critical. This is more reason why a complete re-registration is preferred. It's preferred, so that the people who are on the list deserve to be on the list, and they have a right to be on the list. Madam Chair, I would like to make one observation. I think it is critical to you in particular. Time frame, we have always keep referring to the time frame and completing things on time. I note Senior Counsel Tony Astafans has been at 2 of the last conventions. The very first one, the second one, he repeated the same thing that he said at the first one. But at the first one, we had Attorney at Law Geldon Richards trying to make a point and trying to rebut a point. Madam Chair, he said to him, well, it is recorded, so therefore you don't have to repeat it. I would like to suggest that if Mr. Tony Astafan come back and say the same thing he has been saying, indeed, it has been recorded, so please say something new. Finally, with respect, Mr. Prime Minister, I would like to look at you straight in the eye and tell you what I have to say to you. The issue of electoral reform in Dominica has been on the table for a very long time. We have seen what has happened and the threat that is posed into this country. The good spirit in me says to me that the Spirit of God is having issues with that matter in Dominica. I would like to urge you that those persons that are advising you to cause the delay or to have electoral reform that will not be free and fair for Dominica, it is not a good thing. If I would not say to you that it has been said to me, because I would be arrogant to say so, but I would urge you, sir, to please listen to the voice of the people and do what is right on the issue of electoral reform, and do it quickly and fairly. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your contribution. I think what we're doing here is listening to the voice of the people, all the people. Is there anybody else who would want the floor? Please. Please let us know your name and you can go ahead. Can we have more volume on the mic, please?
Good evening, I'm Mr. Sele. I'm a diaspora relief supporter. I'm the diaspora supporter. I'd like to know why the diasporas have no right to vote. And they are registered on the list. There's some of the diasporas, they cannot vote in one book. So why would they cannot vote in Dominica? We'd like to know about that, please. And they are citizens of Dominica.
Thank you. Well, ma'am, I think that you've heard the discussions here. The gentleman who just spoke says there should be a complete re-registration, which will remove you from the register if you are living in Ward.
That's not the point, because I'm in Dominica. Every month I'm in Dominica. My mother lives in Dominica, I am visiting Dominica every month. I can vote. I have a right to vote in Dominica, just as the other diasporas that live in Guadeloupe. They have their home in Dominica, they have business in Dominica. That is why I'm on behalf of them tonight.
Right.
All right, so let me explain to you that in the proposed legislation, it is proposing that persons in the diaspora who live outside of Dominica in excess of 5 years, and they're absent from Dominica for 5 years, are liable to be removed from the register. It's suggesting that absence means that you have not been in Dominica for a period of 90 or 50 days during that 5-year period.
I was there November, I was there for Prayer Festival. I can vote. I am on the list, I can vote. I will just ask you, because we are hearing a lot of things when we listen to talk shows. So I'm there on the behalf of the diasporas in Guadeloupe.
Thank you, ma'am, and that has been noted. Sorry, there is a gentleman who requires the floor. Please go ahead.
Good night, everyone. I just want to make a correction to Mr. Baptiste. And he said he had 400 persons that he sent to the Electoral Commission for objection. Either Mr. Baptiste doesn't know the law, or he is malicious. Because the law states, if someone has to be objected, the person of doing the objection must be in the same polling station, the same constituency as the person. The form must be filled. A witness must be obtained, voted in the same polling station. So Mr. Baptiste himself cannot send 400 persons and expect the Electoral Commission to remove those names from the list. He did not follow the procedure. And the court cases dealing with that have always said the procedures must be followed. So Mr. Baptiste, your 400 names was incorrect, the procedure was wrong, and the Electoral Commission was correct not to adhere to your request to remove 400 persons because you did not follow the procedures, the legal procedures according to law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Someone else requested the floor. Mr. Joseph.
Hey, good evening. I think I saw two of my colleagues from St. Joseph there, Dr. Anderson and the CAPSEC. And
Can you please indicate your name, please? For the
I was
record.
just about to get to that point. So you know I must say Anthony Joseph, NGG. My two colleagues will know what that means. Okay. I have been in election for, I think that's about 2014. And the first item I would like to bring is section 40 of the proposed bill, nomination of a candidate. I would like to see some sort of guardrail on section 40 because it seems to suggest a person can be nominated in 21 different constituencies if he or she has money, $500 to every constituency. He or she can be nominated 21 times. I would like to see guardrail or rail put the qualification for being nominated should be limited to one constituency purpose of any one general election. Then the other section I would like to see as well, section 19, that makes reference to the withdrawal of a candidate. It seems to suggest that if a person or candidate can withdraw himself within 7 days, but outside of 7 days. Now, I cannot see the wisdom in two candidates. He said, providing that there's not one candidate left, yeah? But I cannot see the wisdom where a person is no longer interested in contesting a general election as a candidate, and he would have one candidate left. So let's assume the population develop a mockery and still vote for that person after having withdrawn, then you have to go through the whole motion of maybe missing, the required session of parliament and have him kicked out and then have a re-election again. So I would suggest that section, that 7 days, I cannot see the wisdom in that 7 days. If a person feel at any time prior to the general election that he or she seeks to or wish to withdraw, he or she should be free to do so, and the chief election officer should declare the other person to be elected. That is the other area I looked at is the issue of the agent. Even before that, section 31, subsection 3b. It's the poll clerk shall, in that section where it says, the person presented themselves as an elector, it says, the poll clerk shall then assert if the name of the elector appears on the official list of electors using the polling station and verify the election or the elector's identity. I'm not sure, it's a bit vague. So it gives the poll clerk the discretion of verifying the person's identity. I'm not sure. That seems to be vague to me. The person's name appears on the list and the person should be allowed to vote, but under the old act, but this one is suggested, the poll clerk also has to verify the person's identity. I'm not sure what does that mean. And finally, the issue of the agent. The agent is allowed in and out of the polling station. I think that falls on that section here, but that section where the agent is allowed out of the polling station up until 4 o'clock. And 1 hour prior to the end of polling, he or she is not allowed to return. Yeah, and that's at the close of poll. Yeah, so it says 1 hour prior to that's 4. And then it gives the presiding officer discretion to invite 2 persons in. So you lock out the agent if he or she excuses himself and he returns after 4. You lock him out of the polling station, and then you have discretion to invite 2 persons. That 2 persons can very well be 2 agents to bring back in again to supervise the final count. So I really cannot see the wisdom why you want to keep the agent after having returned after 4, that he or she can return in the polling station to continue his duties as the agent for either of the candidates. So this is my 4 points I'd like to see addressed.
Thank you, sir. AG, you had an opportunity to find it. Yeah. All right, we've taken note of your comments, Mr. Joseph, and that can be looked into. Sorry, we have a gentleman, the lady over here, and then on this side.
Good evening, my name is Britannia. I'm an executive member of Electoral.
Sorry, can you put the mic a little closer to you?
Yeah?
And can you just repeat your name again, please?
Britannia Gregor.
Britannia Gregor. Yes, thank you.
Before I touch on my 4 points, just to gear towards the other people who spoke this evening, there were 6 points highlighted at the beginning of the presentation that we were to answer, whereas everybody else, so the majority of the other speakers, took it as an opportunity to push an agenda against what's going on. Clearly, they're taking the chance to listen to the voices of the people that's over here. Secondly, to actually answer one of the questions, a general ID card would be the best option issued from birth that would have information such as your passport identification number, your driver's license registration number, etc. That would act as your voter's ID card, and that could be used and implemented in other places. Currently, if you don't have one of the 3 forms of valid ID, which is a driver's license, a passport, or your social security card, you don't have an acceptable form of official picture ID. So that would be a great thing to implement, and it's implemented in 100 countries around the world. Another point, I'm not too sure who made it. I think it was the lady up in purple. No incentive should be given to Dominicans
to confirm their registration to vote. If you don't have an interest in voting, no one should force you to have it. You need to have an interest in your country on your own. You don't need an incentive to have it. And another point is the electronic voting system. Dominica's population is too small to sustain an electronic voting system. That's an unnecessary expense, like you highlighted in the beginning. And to point out something that happened in the American elections a few years back, their electoral system was hacked, and they had to do a recount of all the votes. Seeing our population is so small, what's the sense? That's all.
Thank you very much. We have someone over here who would like the floor, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Eugene Zamo, Dean of Academic Affairs at the Dominica State College. Points I would like to bring forward: verification of residency. So, from what my understanding is, that to verify when you go to register for voting, you have to bring someone from the community to say that you live there, right? So, the person who is verifying from the community, how sure is that person, or who is somebody eligible to verify that, okay, Ms. Joseph is from the community? What is their standing that I am sure that they are saying the truth, that this person is from the community? Also, if I'm in the community only 3 months, I may not be known by the residents of the community. So can something else be used for verification of residence? Example, you go to the bank, you use a bill, you use some form of identification for residency. Secondly, length of time overseas. That's a problem. I find it unfair, in my opinion, that we go to the diasporas for commitment to give money to support the economy, and yet you be saying as a citizen you only have a certain amount of time, or your voting rights to be limited. Right. There are ways to ensure that you monitor diaspora movement. With a voter's national ID or voter's ID, you can limit the amount of time, so renewal in person, like you do for passports, can be organized, right? The mental health issue has been brought up. My last one is, moving forward, given the fact that finances is an issue, how are we going to prioritize what should come first, what should come second, and so on? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Those are points that have to be taken into account. On the question of verification of residency, for example, one has to look what is the best modality, because sometimes people move residents, they still get bills coming to their previous residence. So bills in and of itself cannot be an indication of residency. So that you have to look at what is the best option that you can look at. What we've had since 1978 is that persons who live in the constituency must vouch for you. So if there's a better way of doing it, then we can explore that. But this is what has worked for us for the last 30, 40 years. Sorry, Mr. Timothy.
Go first.
Ladies first.
Good evening, my name is Lucia Stegman. I'm the president of Business Training Center, formerly known as BTC. But tonight I'm here representing a law student that I have. My daughter is a law student in the US. And I'm also here representing my family, most of whom are overseas. All of my siblings, I only have one here. So my concern is I've read and I've listened to all of the discussions of the past 10 years and more about the electoral reform process, etc. Our concern is our constitutional rights as opposed to our fundamental rights. How does the whole electoral reform process cater for students like my daughter who perhaps her financial commitments might not allow her to travel very often to meet the requirements for voting? I am very, very interested in voting and politics. This is something that excites me. And I believe in my fundamental right to vote, so that if I was out of state and I was at hospital, I would probably ask to be removed to go to vote and return. And as a result, I'm looking at the processes and I'm saying, how is this going to affect all of us? Because I'm saying that all of these discussions that we've been having, isn't it that we are going to make the ultimate decision eventually to make whatever it is that everybody wants? Because I'm saying, Dominica, I've been here very long, and I'm saying it doesn't matter what we do, we will probably never get peace. But in the interim, whatever decisions we take, we have to be very careful that we do not infringe on other people's rights. So those of us who have children who cannot travel because law school is expensive, so people like me might not be able to afford for my daughter to do several trips to meet the requirements. But she will be here to vote, because there is some money. Also, my family, it's difficult because they have children, and I always ensure that they come to vote because they deposit their money in the credit union movement that I support. They all do their transactions online through National Bank that I encourage them to do. Everybody, you're going to get to a stage where you're going to retire. When you come back home, you need to have some place to rest yourself. So whatever decisions we take, we need to be very careful as a people that we do not remove people from their rights, their constitutional rights. And my next question is, what is involved? Perhaps you can help me with that one. What is involved with the process of removing dead people's names from the list? I did some research on my own because I'm like that, instead of listening to everybody. And I found out that it involves a process of the village council clerks getting to know who died and bringing it to the electoral office to ensure that the names are removed. So what they're saying is that these people have done the due process and yet still it is not being done. Now, I'm one of the people who would probably defend the public service or put pressure on the public service. I do both. I say sometimes the administration department don't do their jobs. And in the end, the policy makers at the top, they pay for it because you may have a junior clerk who receives the document and don't do what they're supposed to do. And in the end, this group or list of names that have been submitted by the village council, whom I spoke to personally in my village where I vote, and she said that she did dropped. But the clerk did not do the job. So who's responsible in the policy level to ensure that this is eliminated from our talk shows? Because we hear about it a lot, yes, it's a lot. Can we deal with that part? Remove the dead people because we have the confirmation that they are dead. And then we'll take it from there. So that's my contribution.
Thank you very much for that. Just to indicate to you that what is proposed in the bill would be that there will be an exception for the 5-year absence rule for persons who are students, bona fide students, and also persons who are serving in a diplomatic position on behalf of the government. So in the case of your daughter, time would not run against her if she is at an institution studying. But it is an issue for us to discuss. You have indicated that besides your daughter, that there are other members of your family who reside overseas who have a strong commitment to Dominica and should have the right to vote. So thank you very much for your comments in relation to that. On the issue of dead people, I do take your point in relation to it. It may be administrative issues sometimes why people are not removed, but the confirmation process that is being suggested is looking at people actually coming and verifying that they need to continue on the register. So it would automatically mean that dead people would be removed. So it would have that effect. Mr. Timothy and then Mr. Belfield.
Okay, good evening, Jason Timothy, engineer. So I'm somewhat torn on this subject. I do believe that people who live overseas should remain on the list. Now the time frame is where it becomes tricky. The thing about it is, even when people move away for 20 years and you ask them where they're from, they're going to tell you Dominica. It goes against the spirit of being from somewhere and then removing that right that you are from that place. And again, we go back to, as she said, not everybody can afford to do it. I know there are people who come here every single year for big carnival, big Creole festival, and they are actually contributing so much to the country in those small times that I guess in the spirit of the thing, it goes against my belief that they should be taken out after 5 years. I think if we look at maybe something like 15 years, maybe we now start to get into the realm of something we can discuss. But it's kind of difficult for me to sign off on that 50 days in 5 years. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Belfield.
Pleasant good evening, Madam Chair, Attorney General of the head table, Prime Minister, members of Cabinet, the observers, special invitees, and to the rest of us that know very little about the Constitution. Good evening to everyone. My stay here is going to be very brief. And I'm here to, Phoenix Belfield, Credit Union, and Credit Union. There are a couple of things I wanted to know, and they're centered around 4 particular areas that the AG mentioned. Eligibility, identification, access to media, and campaign financing. So just some general questions. On the issue of eligibility, and I was happy when the lady from the diaspora mentioned about it, because I wanted to ask the question, how much of a stake is a stake? We know for our small islands, we're very dependent on remittances. A lot of the persons who have gone abroad support the economic activity happening back home. And the question we would need to ask ourselves is how much of a stake does the diaspora need to have a meaningful voice in what happens here? Because if you're remitting 80% of your salary back home, then is that enough as a stake to be able to have a voice? And so if we say to them that we know what happened after Hurricane Maria, the outpouring of support, if we say that we can accept your help, we can accept your financial contributions, but you're not good enough to influence what happens here, then it is something that we need to consider. So that's on eligibility. So how much of a stake is a stake, if there's any at all? Sometimes we might want to go for ballot.
Do you have any recommendations on that? I know you're posing the question.
The thing about it is that I believe that we have to establish what is really important. Is it the exclusion of those on the outside to only have the few within dictate? Or are we to set up parameters by which those on the outside can have a meaningful participation in the process? So I think, for example, when we look at that, we need to also take into consideration, and a couple of points were raised, the financial means of persons to come and become meaningful part of this dialogue. So because I'm a student overseas and I cannot afford to travel, does that mean that I should not have a say in what happens here? You know, these are some of the things that we need to answer. So is it that we're willing to discriminate on that point to ensure that the process is restrictive, or do we create a meaningful avenue for which that person can be integrated? So for me, I'm not for restriction. I think that we should have a meaningful dialogue, and I think there's an abundance of ideas as to how we can regulate that process. But we should find a way to ensure that the diasporans can participate meaningfully once they're eligible. Because if we're going to take your money, we're going to listen to you. On the identification part, I've heard discussions regarding voter ID versus national ID. I am of the view that perhaps we can look at combining both. From the digital side, I mean, I know the Ministry of Digital Economy has been doing a fantastic job. And once we have a kind of robust monitoring mechanism, it is just a matter of linking two databases, one for national ID and one for voter eligibility. So if voter eligibility is 18 years and over, then whatever features that you have in card biometrics or whatever, it is automatically going to restrict those that are under 18 years. So it means that we don't have to spend twice. So perhaps we can combine the two and save some money, because just having a single card to be used every 5 years, I don't know if we're that rich. So we can look at that. Access to media. I think the AG mentioned it, the restriction could probably best only apply to state media. The mechanism by which the access will be regulated is something that probably will find me. But airtime, you look at airtime, you look at financing. But in the private sector, and a lot of it is done outside the private sector, how will we, I don't think, if you're a private sector broadcaster, that's the time you're looking to maximize. Election, everybody wants to play. You go it right down the middle, because whoever has the money to buy your airtime, that's who gets it. So I think it might probably only be limited to the state media. On the campaign financing side, and this is more of a question, how do we manage something that we cannot monitor? I mean, we've seen it happen in the US. And I've been actually doing some research as to, is there a direct correlation between who spends more winning the election? Because I've seen where who spends more lose plenty. So how do we monitor it? Because, I mean, there's a quote on the Jamaica model where you have to look at who makes a contribution, who receives it, declarations, fines for not defining, and so forth and so forth. The question is, will campaign contribution be taxable? You know, will we be able to claim it at the end of the year? That's just on the right side. But it is something that we have to consider critically. If we cannot monitor it, we can't manage it. So then we need to know, put in the elements within it that is going to ensure that whatever we set cannot be aspirational. It has to be something that we can manage. And so if we're going to define that, it needs to be some sort of declaration. Persons need to define, entities or individuals that are contributing need to define. They need to be, for example, you can decide as a candidate if you go based on the funds of your party, or you're going to be privately funded. What are the limits and ceilings of that fund and so forth. So it has to be, it cannot be aspirational, it has to be, because if you cannot manage it, if you cannot monitor it, then what's the point? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Belville. The lady wants the floor. Sorry.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicola Bill. I'm the Director of Engineering with the Dominican Hospital Authority. My main point that I want to bring up regarding electoral reform in general is that every time we have elections, and the whole rhetoric or the cliche behind electoral reform is free and fair elections. And I'm just hoping that all of the measures that we're recommended do not infringe on the freeness of the electoral process. I've had the privilege of working in polling stations, and it's a very interesting experience. It's one experience that I will treasure, because it's amazing to see that you sit there and you see persons from all walks of life, young, old, disabled, all the spectrums of Dominicans coming, and they just see their name. They come in, even before they say their name, you see all of the polling agents crossing on their name because they know the person. And they come, and they vote, they cast their ballot, and they leave. And even in that experience, I've had the privilege of speaking to electoral observers, the international observers, and they say, yes, I see everybody coming, they're free, they vote, and then they leave. So there is that freedom. And in all of the measures that we want to take, I just hope that we do not infringe on the freedom that people have right now. So we have people who are tech savvy that will be able to register online, if that is as it comes to be, to vote. There are people who will be able to use, I see in the report, recommendations for voting machines. There are people who will be able to use it, and then some people will watch it and say, I don't want to interfere with that. So we have to be very careful and think of options and think of our population when we're doing that. That is my contribution.
Thank you very much. Another lady wants the floor, and then, sorry, before you.
Thank you, gentlemen, Madam Chairman, and Your Excellencies. I found it very interesting that
we need you to speak into the mic because it's being transcribed. So
okay.
He needs to hear what you're
My
saying.
name is Robertson Thomas, medical doctor.
Thank you.
I found it interesting that Dr. Robertson started off the floor by asking the question about somebody who is defined as mentally ill, excluded, so to speak, from his right to vote. In 2022, the DBAEC wrote regarding ministers of religion and the involvement in elective or representative politics. And the Constitution, in effect, equates the minister of religion to somebody who is mentally ill, he or she cannot vote, or someone who is an inmate at the prison, part of the Constitution. And so there may be a justification for that, but I would love to know what that is. But I think it's an area that needs to be given some due consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment as well. Sorry, Dr. Joseph, and then.
Okay, right. Mr. Melville raised an interesting point on the question of campaign financing. And I see that the report mentions regulation of campaign financing. And some of the areas that have been identified include setting an upper limit on what individual donors can donate to the party of their choice. Now, if the intention is to regulate campaign financing, I fail to see how that might actually be effective. Because once you might limit individual donors, you might have one party who has a large cohort of donors donating small amounts, and that gives them an advantage in terms of financing. Whereas you have other party who has one or two donors who give a large amount, and they are, again, the financing is not comparable to the other party. So unless there is an upper limit to what campaign financing can be, I think it creates an unnecessary administrative burden to look at who is donating what, and also giving people a tax rebate and reducing our tax income. So I think we need to think carefully about this. I think we need to think carefully about this regulation for the campaign financing aspect. Because I understand the spirit of regulating what individual donors are able to give, but I think we need to go further and ask whether or not the measures proposed will actually deliver that outcome.
Thank you very much. Mr. LeBlanc, very briefly, please.
Yes.
Stay where you are.
Tony, be brief, Tony. Be brief.
So, is this on? I guess it's not on.
Just to indicate, Mr. Libla, we have to be brief because we are already out of time. So
I understand that, so let's
Thank
not take
you.
the time. And I suppose it didn't cater for the hearing impaired because of where the computer is, it makes it more difficult for me to make my point. So you're delaying me in that tactics too. So let us go back. I want to look at 2 points. All right, I'm going to be brief. The diaspora and polling district residency. The debate about the disenfranchisement of diaspora may be real or perceived. What about the disenfranchisement of the residents in the polling district? Someone who doesn't know what it takes, the impact that I feel as a resident comes in finance because he doesn't put aside money for him to come down to vote, but it's finance to come and decide who should be my representative. So we have to look at that point because that's significant. How do we verify that a diaspora contribution makes him eligible to vote? Is it 1 barrel? Is it $10,000? How do we do that? Should the diaspora be required to file tax return to be eligible to be called contributing? And how do we make it equitable that every overseas diaspora doesn't feel disenfranchised? Somebody in Niger or somebody in Timbuktu or somebody in California. How do we make that decision? Let's look at campaign financing and paying people to vote because they're intertwined. Mark you. Senior Counsel Tony Astafan says you have not been able to prove that a particular person was brought in to vote for a particular person. Sure, maybe not, but you admit that there is a wide and common practice that impacts the wishes of the resident population by persons who are not passionate enough to afford it themselves to come to vote. And I come because of the trip. I have not come before. I have not been able to send a barrel to my grandmother who wear pampers, but I come for the trip. And I'm not so interested, except for coming for the trip. And it doesn't mean because we can't prove something legally that it's not wrong and it doesn't affect us.
Just to indicate to you, Mr. Leblanc, that what the law says is that the facilitating of a voter by either providing transportation, please let me just finish, please, providing transportation for them to come to vote is not illegal unless it's done with corrupt intent. That's what the law says.
I'm not debating that and I divide myself 30 seconds. Let me move to the other point.
That's actually 2 points, but
how oh shit, this is she disturbed me and I need to buy some time. Take my time. Okay, how people tell me take my time. Good. That makes it we are all in the same boat dealing the same matters. That's good. So so there are 2 ways to deal with that issue of diaspora paying for votes and so. One of it is can we allocate some of the funds for campaign financing to those who cannot afford to come and vote and do it in a transparent way? Should that be one way to look at it? And then we manage campaign financing and paying people for votes because they're intertwined. The other way is, can we have constituencies dedicated for the diaspora? The lady wants to be able to contribute to Dominica's affairs, but it doesn't mean that she has to disturb the residents in the police district about the way they live. She can contribute, of course, by having a constituency for diasporas. And not only for diasporas, But don't forget the CBI citizens. Can we have one for them too? Because we're speaking about 42,000 CBI citizen holders versus possibly 55,000 eligible voters. And Dominica's situation is not common in CARICOM or the OACS or the Commonwealth. So we need to deal with that matter too. My last point has to do with dealing with, give me a minute. Stop. Technology is messing up. Now I understand why they say you don't want to go technology. Okay. We have to deal with the link between the perceived or illegal practices and enhancing how we deal with enforcement. Mrs. Tidier said it well on Monday, that we enact a provision in law so that we can enforce and encourage and preserve something that is good in the society, and or to discourage, to stem, or to curtail or eradicate unfair or illegal or bad practices in the society. The provisions of the new law should make it fairly good to enforce. We should make it very easy to enforce. Senior Counsel Tony Astafan has been saying basically we should make into sins those who are culpable, but you cannot catch them properly. And that's not what we want as a society. If we have laws that we not enforce it, we can't enforce it because they keep going to court and by some technicality they are not enforceable. We need to fix that. Not make sins of the guilty people. The law should provide avenues to make it easy to be enforced and discourage bad practices. It is rather incomprehensible that there are time restrictions for filing election petitions and challenges, but no time limit to make sure that those petitions are heard. And especially within an election cycle, something is wrong, and we need to fix that.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Let me just ask you one question.
You're very much welcome for giving me more time.
I've heard the issue raised about CBI citizens. And I just want you to tell me, we've had citizenship by investment for almost 30 years now. How many of those citizens have been on the electoral register, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge?
Zero.
Zero. Are you in the practice of asking a question and answering it yourself? Well, give me a minute. Give me a minute.
I think the answer is very clear.
Well, you see, you don't want an answer. But are you saying that we should allow ourselves to be caught by surprise? Because at the end of the day, if you're speaking about 42,000 CBI citizens...
But you will agree with me that...
I'm not agreeing anything with you. I'm putting another point forward to you.
Okay, then
you will agree with me that we should deal with an issue before it surfaces on our hands.
So it has not surfaced. In other words, it has not surfaced.
So you're waiting for your grandchild to take the gun and shoot it before you put it away.
So Mr. LeBlanc, the law requires you to be resident in a particular constituency for at least 3 months for you to qualify as a Dominican citizen to vote. It also provides that you can also vote in
I think we don't need to waste time. I know the law about that. So don't try to teach me.
I'm glad that you do.
Yes. Okay. But I'm saying we need to protect ourselves.
Sorry, Dr. Robinson.
Good evening again, and thank you for the opportunity to speak again. I just have a point with Mr. LeBlanc. I have a true issue when we try to tier our citizens. Local versus diasporic versus a CBI Dominican versus a Haitian Dominican versus a other. I have issue with that. If you're Dominican, you're Dominican. Okay? If you're worthy enough to give if I figure that you're worthy enough to get a passport to be called a Dominican citizen, then by our constitution, I think that we deserve the right to vote. Whether any of them have taken advantage of that, that's something completely different. But do they have the right to vote? they should, because they're Dominican citizens.
Thank you very much for that. Folks, it is now 9:30, and I would encourage you, if you have additional comments that you would want to make, if you can make that in writing, you can send it to the Cabinet Secretary at the Cabinet Office on the 6th floor of the Financial Center. I need to be guided. If we can have more airtime and have the people still there, we can continue. Okay, so I'm guided that we can continue. So, right after.
Thank you. Just a brief point for clarification. We know we have the international observers here present. I don't know if you have explained it before, but what I would like to know is what would be the specific role of the observers? Is it just to observe, or will they be a report? And if they will be presenting a report, will that report will be public? And if they're reporting, will it be reported as the organization they represent or as a report? That's just one
It is my understanding that the observers here will be preparing reports in relation to it. It has always been that the government has made reports from observers available, and the observers themselves make those reports available. So I would expect that any reports coming out of this observation will be made available either directly by the observers themselves or by the government or by both. Sorry? Right. And they would have received copies of the report as well, and I am sure they are listening very carefully to all of the discussions and the contributions that are being made. Sorry, sir?
I just want to go back to what Mr. Leblanc just mentioned. The matter of election petitions being given 21 days for individuals to register their complaint. And I mentioned earlier that this area of our law has been unconstitutionally handled. And since you brought it up, I want to address it, because we have a system of government that is divided into three parts: the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The courts have jurisdiction over all cases and controversies. However, Section 40 of the Constitution goes on to specifically give the courts jurisdiction, which means they are being given jurisdiction over something they do not normally have jurisdiction over. So that the Constitution did not intend that the statute of limitations in all matters be reduced from at least 1 year to 21 days. That would obviously be a violation of my rights as a citizen. And the fact that we have treated election petitions as if they are matters of legal cases is somewhat embarrassing. Let me illustrate something to you. Section 40 says, because I want to go back to a case from 2005, Frampton v. whoever it is, in which the Court of Appeals wrongly concluded that when an election petition is brought in which the government, in which the Prime Minister is a party, that they must mention the election, they must bring in the Attorney General. The problem with that is the court did not realize that the Constitution says that whenever the Attorney General is a party in an election petition, he cannot be under the control of any other party. Which means the Attorney General cannot serve as anybody's lawyer in an election petition. Because Section 40 of the Constitution says two things which we have added in our law, our Constitution. One, that it actually prefers that the Attorney General brings a matter of an election petition, and also secondly it says that every election petition shall be tried. So when we say in our court findings that we can throw out an election petition, we're actually violating our very law, because the law says every election petition shall be tried. So if you throw it out, you're treating it as an ordinary case, which it is not, because I will stop because you should in your head.
I'm shaking my head still because that issue has been debated in the courts, and the courts have ruled on it. And it has consistently held that you have 21 days within which to bring a petition.
That is true. However, saying that it has been ruled in the court doesn't make, because remember, the Constitution is the supreme law.
Yes, it is.
And it says that you, by that statement, you can violate it if you want. There's nothing wrong. You can violate the Constitution, but it says that whatever you do, because there's one thing we're forgetting about constitutions. There's no constitution in the world that makes it a crime to violate it. I can't take you to court for violating the Constitution. I can take you to court for violating the law, but not for violating the Constitution. The reason for that is because if you violate the Constitution, you're in fact saying, I do not want to be guided by this Constitution, therefore I am not a member of the society. And if you are not a member of the society that governs the Constitution, then the courts have the jurisdiction over you. But it says that whatever you do in that circumstance is void. That's the only remedy the Constitution grants us. And so the fact that courts have held certain things doesn't really change the matter. And I'll say one more thing, because the first thing that really hit me in law school was when my professor said repeatedly, my property professor, he kept saying, the court got it wrong. Courts do get it wrong.
So if we may, section 41 of the Constitution says that the High Court shall have jurisdiction to hear and determine any question whether any person has been validly elected as a representative or senator. It also goes on at sub 5 to say the circumstances and the matter in which and the imposition of conditions upon which any application may be made to the High Court for the determination of any question under this section, and the powers, practice, and procedure of the High Court in relation to any such application shall be regulated by such provision as may be made by Parliament. So the Constitution acknowledges that Parliament may make decisions in relation to how these petitions can be dealt with. So these are the issues you're talking about are issues that have been legislated in the court before in terms of whether a petition that is filed after the 21 days is a valid petition, and that has been decided by the courts. But I take your point. This is your interpretation of it. We have court interpretation of it. Your point has been noted. Right. So I think. Sorry. Can we have a mic, please?
I know the issue has been raised about CBI citizens and so on, but the Constitution also allows for Commonwealth citizens who meet the residency requirement to vote in nominee. Rwanda is in the Commonwealth. What if 50,000 Rwandans were to relocate to nominee?
They're resident.
Right, so the point I'm making is that if we are making a strong case against Dominicans who were born in Dominica and who were registered in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution and the electoral laws, why do we need to make such a vehement opposition towards the going through the process if we do pass the law on confirmation to get confirmed, and when they do, the question is, do we put any limitations on them? Example. Can I respond? One second. One of the recommendations of Sir Dennis Byron is for 90 or 50-day residency in Dominica for 45 years. This is about 10-12 days every year. To me, this isn't this 50-day scenario more of a tourism promotion? Come to Dominica rather than a requirement of voting, which is such an important first constitutional right? so I just put it to us as part of the continuation of our thinking. That the arguments I believe we make must be steeped in some kind of foundation that really speaks to the progressiveness or the progressive nature of our society. And why are we so suspicious of Dominicans who live overseas? You know, all of whom were born in Dominica. Yes, Tony.
Yeah, can I?
By the way, are you registered in 2 places now?
I hope you're not speaking to a mirror, Prime Minister.
Can we have the mic for Mr. LeBlanc, please?
I am registered in 1 place. I registered in 2 places. I registered in 1 place.
No, Mr.
One. Yeah, I put it in one constituency.
Prime Minister, we need to look at a few things. If Rwandans come to Dominica and relocate, they are residents. And I think you accept that. I am not opposing the participation of those from the diaspora. I'm just saying, let us be clear what we're talking about. I mean, we say that they contribute, that's fine. But how do you gauge eligibility against contribution? Who is a contributor? And whether that is a yardstick? Well, let me finish. You have it sometime, Prime Minister. So, whether there are other ways to compromise on the issue, whether having a constituency for diasporas is one way. I mean, at the end of the day, the burning issue. Yeah, at the end. Is it good now? No. No?
Go again.
What's that?
No, go ahead.
No, but you want the people on the radio to hear me too. At the end of the day, Prime Minister, there is a burning issue about the impact of those from the diaspora who come just to vote. Wait, let me finish. Just to vote. And we cannot have a correlation between those who are holiday makers, come here for 15 days a year, of 10 days a year, and impact on the way people in the constituency live for 350 days out of 365 days. I mean, I understand your point, but let us make sure that nobody is disenfranchised, both the diaspora and those living in Port District. And there's a compromise position.
But how do you go about achieving this virtual constituency? Listen, or this diaspora constituency. Who would be the candidate for that constituency?
Well, that's the discussion I'd like to have.
No, you propose it, so I'll put these questions to you, maybe rhetorical questions.
Well, I can answer, I can give you some ideas if you want them.
And how is that person going to sit in the parliament?
I can give you some ideas for that. The same way you can nominate somebody in a constituency, and Anthony Joseph is right about that. Actually, at the last election that you called impromptu last year, I planned to just test our laws by registering in Vickers and registering in the valley. But I was too busy with the geothermal project. But the point is, no, I'm testing the law. Mr. Joseph is right about that. But the point is the same way you nominate somebody is the same way you can nominate somebody for a diaspora. And the point is you do not, according to our law now, Dr. Vince Henderson could go up in Granby, but he was not necessarily resident in Granby. Why couldn't somebody from living in Dominica be representing diaspora or vice versa?
That's a question. Don't you think from your side that we can achieve all of the matters we wish to achieve where electoral reform is concerned within the current frame of our constitution? do we need to have constitutional amendments? Because what you're proposing in respect to this diaspora constituency will require an amendment to the Constitution.
Right. But Prime Minister, I think we have put that under the table for now, but we know very well we need to review the Constitution. We haven't done that since we're independent. Yeah.
But I'm saying, no, I don't think you asked me. Do you think that we can achieve our desired objectives of society and country in respect to electoral reform with the present frame of our Constitution, provisions of our Constitution?
I will respond to that by saying I don't think.
Let's stop. I tie this to the point which Mr. Baptist watched my eyes tell me that that time is of the essence. And if time is of the essence, then we also, if we talk about amendments to the Constitution, then are we not prolonging the whole process of achieving the objective in time?
No, I don't agree that we'll be prolonging it. I mean, we should be able to set a roadmap for moving with our country, and we cannot put reviewing of the Constitution out of that roadmap. I mean, we can deal with the issues we can deal with now, and we can say those are issues that we need to deal with under the Constitution, and you come back to them. There's a strategy and there's a process.
That's right, but why don't we deal with this? Don't you think it might be good to deal with it on a phase basis? So let us deal with the electoral reform within the framework of the Constitution. I see Professor Lakeland is agreeing with me, and I appreciate that. And then the issue of constitutional reform can be another phase.
I share your view, Prime Minister, that I do not believe the issues that have been coming out over the last 3 election cycles, we do not need an amendment to the Constitution to address. That's a fact. But some persons have put up additional issues that will require an amendment to the Constitution. I would not, because of the burning need to have free and fair elections reasonably, then a procedure that would call for amendment to the Constitution, I would not advocate. In fact, many of the issues that we are now discussing for electoral reform, I believe can be dealt with under the existing legislation. But however, the problem that has happened over the last 3 or 4 election cycles that we have not been administering the legislation the way it was intended to administer. And that's where the problem lies. And therefore, most of us feel that the only way to approach it is to go through electoral reform. We have had many reports, we have had many discussions. The main issue, important thing that came out of the Byron's study or report is the fact that it came out with draft legislation, which I've never had before.
So you say this about this?
Well, we have had suggested amendment, but no main legislation.
No, but for the purposes of the observers and those who may not be aware, there was a report on electoral reform and also legislation. And that legislation was examined by the experts from the Commonwealth Secretary, who advised us that the laws, the draft bill as drafted, would have achieved the desired objective of allowing Dominica to meet some international standards, especially the observations that they made in their previous report. So all of the provisions would have addressed those issues. We did in fact go to the Parliament. I've said so before, but it's also worth repeating. We did go to Parliament to pass legislation.
I was in Parliament.
Right, and it was, I stood it down. As a leader of the House, I stood it down to allow for further discussion outside of the Parliament on this issue. Just to say, just to go back, in 2015, our country was affected by Tropical Storm Erin in August. By March of 2016, after 90% of our GDP was affected, and I had to mobilize resources to relocate and build 2 entire communities. I provided all the funds to the Electoral Commission to advance the process of electoral reform in Norway. The equipment has been sitting at the Electoral Commission office in 2016. The software, the hardware. I provided staff, equipment, and all of the resources. As a matter of fact, I went above and beyond because by the time the chief election officer his background was in audit, and then you know auditors are usually, accountants are usually very careful with money. And I increased the amount that the commission requested the cabinet they wanted to ensure that they have not only what they requested, but more than what they requested, as a clear demonstration of the government's commitment to electoral reform. And so, had we passed legislation in 2017, Mr. Lula, we would not be here. We'll be talking, what we're doing here now is to talk about constitutional reform, which we're discussing, and not electoral reform, had we allowed the legislation to go in 2017. Now, when we struck down the legislation in 2017, I directed and asked the Attorney General to write to all political parties and various representative bodies in government and attach the draft bill to the law, though it was posted in the government website prior to us going to Parliament. And we wrote to them and said, look, this is what we're taking to Parliament, or we took to Parliament. Which clauses you do not agree with, and which do you agree with? We never got a response from any of those organizations. And so my hope, as I said last time, because you see, we speak a lot about electoral reform in a peripheral manner, right? But not sitting down as the young lady did, and some other people have done, and make specific and concrete recommendations on the 6 or 7 fundamental points that we've been talking about. And really not really 6 points. It's really been the bloating of the voters list, or whatever we're going to call it. So we have to go for a process of confirmation or verification. The issue of whether we do away with 5 years or we keep the 5 years residency requirement in Germany. Coming to the once a year, one of it. The issue of ensuring that on a continuous basis, that the issue of dead people can be automatically removed. And in the legislation that we recommended here, it ties the registrar of deaths to the Electoral Commission, so that automatically a name will be transmitted to the Electoral Commission and the name will be removed automatically with the use of technology. And really these are the issues. The issue of campaign financing. As you know, we are the most organized and most comprehensive political organization in Norway. What is being proposed in the law is okay for me. But we also have to look at fairness. It will not be okay to many political organizations in Norway, because it's placing in positions on political parties of staffing. Where do they get the money to pay for the staff that the law is imposing on them to ensure that they can fulfill the obligations on the law? So my view, my dear friends, fellow citizens, is for us to reduce the discussion, because what we have to do is to agree on what are the fundamental policy positions, so that those policy positions can be reflected in the legislation. And so let us move away from these speeches that we've been giving for so many years, that allows for contentious engagement, because we make all sorts of statements that are imputing improper motives, that innuendos, falsehoods, and so on. Let us move away from this. Let us focus on the report. Let us report on the 4 or 5 things that we need to address and move forward. And so this is what I want to put to us. And so I'm hoping that in your new submission, Mr. Lula, you have been, all fairness to you, you have been relentless as a citizen in respect to your voice. Right or wrong, whatever you say, whether it's true or not, that's a separate issue. But you have been engaged and engaging in the issue of electoral reform. And I recognize your dedication and commitment to the cause. But because when you have a cause, you must look for an end.
Exactly.
And what is the end? And so exactly. the rhetoric has to change a bit. To more mature engagement, and not seeking to go around the issues and not fundamental ways.
So I think you may have been listening to my presentation, and that's exactly what I said. Yes, so that's exactly what I said, Prime Minister. And are you going to help put the machinery in place that we have an end by having a grouping of body of persons similar to what we did with the electoral reform group?
I can consider that. But
no, there's a difference between consider and committing. I can commit to that. I'll tell you what. Okay, tell me.
The president of the Bar Association said on Monday that she had not been able to convene a meeting of the fraternity, and she's unlikely to get a consensus among her membership. Now, Now, if you put someone like that on a committee to review legislation and recommendations, who is she representing? And so what makes, I'm putting to you,
yes.
What makes me or you or Dr. Joseph's more important than the fisherman from Scotland or the former Pendle, with all our voice? And therefore we have to ensure that every Dominican, as far as possible, is given an opportunity to be heard on this matter, and not those of us who believe that only the voices of the Dominicans. Because I am the person in this room and in the country who represents more people. But I don't think that I have a bigger voice than anybody in this country in respect to electoral reform. I have only one voice, that's fine. I will be able to influence others. That's a separate consideration. But everybody must be given a voice. And I don't think it is right at this stage for us to close the consultation process and pick 5-6 people and say you have been appointed by the Prime Minister, because they say I shouldn't be appointing anybody, but you asked me to appoint me.
No, I didn't ask you to appoint you. You got it wrong.
I'm saying actually, I don't think at this stage it is the right time to give consideration to that.
So when is the right time?
I think we have to allow for consultation.
Fine, I have no problem with that.
We're going to the villages, constituencies.
Prime Minister, you need to give me a chance sometimes to speak. Let's be fair. I have not said that it needs to be appointed by you, first of all. And my emphasis was on transparency and putting it up from the political parties, giving it to the Electoral Commission to handle, and to have a cadre of persons from the public to deal with it. Yes, I know that there are a lot of organizations in Dominica that are in shambles. Whether it's the Engineers Association, whether it is the accountants, whether it's the lawyers, we have a problem with that. It doesn't mean that there are not people in those organizations who the other members would put up. All right? And we shouldn't use that as an excuse to say we cannot do it. Once we do that, we're going back in circles and we use it as an excuse for us to go back in circles.
I'm not saying we cannot do it. What I'm saying is that it is too early for us to make that suggestion. I think we need to allow for the consultative process to carry through. If we go ahead and say tonight,
no,
we appoint a committee. Listen to me. We appoint a committee on Friday or Monday. Before we go to Scotland, before we go to Marigot, before we go to Granby, before we go to Portsmouth, before we go to St. Joseph and Barrow, how do you think the rest of us in the country would think? So I'm saying that let us take it step by step. I think tonight was very good. And I really want to thank all of you for being here. I mean, we all have different views, and that's what consultation is about. But I need to find what are the cross-cutting themes and agreements? What's the consensus?
One last question for you, Prime Minister.
Sure.
Do you think that the electoral reform group had no place or didn't contribute significantly to the debate? And if you do, don't rush too much. If you do think they had an impact, they were placed there and nominated by a small group of civil society, church, business, and they dedicated 8 months to that, to the point where we saw that the grouping from CARICOM, OS, and the Commonwealth came in as an attempt to either verify what they were saying or to put it aside, and then it probably was the reason why elections was called so quickly. But at the end of the day, if that group could have made an impact, there's no reason why there are people who are interested in the reform process cannot be involved more continuously, and from this continuous work process, we can elect to nominate persons.
Sure. But any group or any individual that puts himself or themselves together to discuss a topical national issue must be commended. I will not agree with the contents of the discussion or the contents of the report.
Sure.
Because a lot of it's really a lot of emotive things there. So we have different views. But as to get here, this is why we're here. You know, and you and I have a conversation. And this is why I want to engage you, not to influence your views, but to seek clarification from your point of view and your organization's point of view on some of the issues that we need to consider. So I'm not seeking to influence you one or the other. But yes, we engage and we support any organization that wishes to meet and to discuss. On the issue of, this is why I call it election. I don't think that you're that formidable to defeat the Labour Party.
But you can't defeat somebody if you're not interested in fighting them, Prime Minister.
But I don't, you guys don't know, there's no for me to fight.
Exactly. So there was no need for me to fight. So how could anybody defeat
No, I'm just responding to your question. Is it the organization has caused me to call election?
I didn't say that. Okay. I alluded to that. I didn't say that.
But thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And it's very good to see that we're having a discussion. We're talking not at each other, but with each other. So I think that's healthy. And I think we just had a good discourse between the Prime Minister and Mr. LeBlanc and others. Folks, I know coming out of that, there are other comments that we would want to make, but I'm cognizant of time as well. But if I get the signal that we can continue.
I think Tony has some already said tonight.
Right, so, right, so.
I've always said where I'm going to see.
So thank you all very much. We do have some refreshments in the room on the left, and thank you very much.